think you can take everything from me?" I said it out loud right there in that courtroom, loud enough for Alexander to hear across the room. He turned, and for 1 second, just one, the smile dropped. He walked in with her on his arm. My husband. Tailored suit, her perfume in the air, and that smile, the smile of a man who has already counted his money and written off his wife. He had a mistress, a lawyer, and 11 offshore accounts. What he didn't have was any idea what was inside the sealed envelope sitting on the judge's desk, the envelope that was about to end him. I had spent 4 months building that moment, and I was ready. If this story speaks to your heart, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow every single part of my story until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far my story has traveled. Now let's begin. I remember the exact moment I stopped being afraid of Alexander Brooks. It wasn't the day I found the lipstick on his collar. It wasn't the night I heard him whispering into his phone in the garage at 2 in the morning, thinking I was asleep. It wasn't even the afternoon he sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared 10 years of breakfasts, 10 years of Sunday mornings, 10 years of building something I thought was real, and told me flat and calm, as if he were reading from a business memo, that he wanted a divorce. No. The moment I stopped being afraid was the morning I found the envelope. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Let me take you to the beginning of the end so you understand exactly what kind of man Alexander Brooks really was and exactly what kind of woman he made the mistake of underestimating. We met when I was 26. He was 32, already successful, already sharp around the edges, in the way that men who fought hard for everything tend to be. I was finishing my graduate degree in family law, working 2 part-time jobs, living in a studio apartment with a broken radiator and big dreams. He told me on our 3rd date that I was the most resilient woman he had ever met. I believed him. I loved him for saying it. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't understand for a very long time, was that Alexander Brooks admired resilience only when it served him. The moment my strength became inconvenient for him, he would try to dismantle it. We built a life together, a real one. I gave up my law career when our first son James was born, not because Alexander asked me to, but because we agreed together that one of us should be home at least for the early years. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would go back. But then our daughter Claire came 2 years later, and the years kept moving and the law career stayed in the drawer, like a dream I kept meaning to return to. I poured everything into that family, everything. And Alexander poured everything into his company. For a while it worked. For a while we were something close to happy. Or at least we were close to comfortable, which I would learn is not the same thing at all. The distance started small. A canceled dinner here, a weekend trip turned into a week-long business excursion, phone calls he took behind closed doors, a coldness that settled over him like frost, slow and quiet, until one day I realized I couldn't remember the last time he had looked at me, really looked at me like I was someone he loved. I asked him about it once, just once. "Alexander," I said one evening when the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, and I had spent the whole day steeling myself for this conversation. "Are we okay?" He looked up from his laptop, just looked at me, and then he said, "What kind of question is that, Elena?" "A serious one." He closed the laptop slowly. "We're fine. I'm just busy. You know how the company is right now." "I'm not talking about the company." He exhaled, long, patient, the way you exhale when you think someone is being irrational. "Elena, I provide for this family. The house, the cars, the kids' schools, all of it. I don't know what more you want from me. I want you to be present. I want you to be my husband." He stood up and picked up his laptop. "I am your husband. That's what I'm doing every day when I go to work." He walked out of the room. Conversation over. That was 3 years before the divorce papers. I didn't find out about Sophia until much later. A friend, a mutual friend, the kind of friend who waits too long to tell you things, but eventually tells you because her conscience wins. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in October and said, "Elena, I think you need to know something, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't say something sooner." Her name was Sophia Crane. She was 31. She worked at Alexander's firm as a senior consultant. They had been together, if you could call it that, for over 2 years. 2 years. I sat in my car in the school parking lot waiting for James and Claire to come out, and I held my phone against my chest and I breathed. Just breathed. In and out. In and out. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I thought I would shatter, but instead something very quiet and very steady came over me, something I can only describe as clarity. I thought I am going to need to be smarter than I have ever been in my life, and so instead of confronting Alexander that night, I made a different choice. I called my sister. I called my old law school mentor. And then I called a private investigator named Marcus Webb, who came highly recommended and who, as it turned out, was very, very good at his job. For 4 months, I watched and I waited and I gathered. Marcus documented everything. The dinners, the hotel stays, the weekend she flew with him to San Francisco under the guise of a conference. He got photographs, credit card records, hotel receipts, a paper trail so thick and so damning that even Alexander's legendary ability to spin a narrative would crumble under it. But none of that was what destroyed him in the end. What destroyed him in the end was his own arrogance. Because while I was quietly building my case, Alexander was making plans of his own. He had clearly decided, without telling me, without a single honest conversation, that the marriage was over. And in typical Alexander fashion, he didn't just decide to leave. He decided to leave in a way that would protect every cent of his fortune and cost me as much as possible. He had his own private attorney working for months before he ever said the word divorce to my face. The morning he told me, I already knew. Marcus had flagged unusual activity with several of Alexander's accounts, money being moved, assets being restructured. It was deliberate, calculated. He was hiding things so that when the divorce proceedings began, there would be less to divide. "I want a divorce, Elena," he said, sitting across from me at that kitchen table, hands folded in front of him. No emotion, no apology, like he was closing a business deal. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay, I heard you. Okay." I think he expected tears, or screaming, or begging. Instead, I poured myself another cup of coffee and asked him to have his attorney contact mine. I watched something flicker across his face. Confusion, maybe. A small, brief unease. Then he straightened his jacket and nodded. "Good. I'm glad we can be adults about this." I smiled. "Oh, Alexander, so am I." He didn't hear the edge in it. He never did. Over the following weeks, the real battle began behind the scenes. My attorney, a sharp and relentless woman named Patricia Mercer, who had been practicing family law for 30 years and had zero tolerance for financial manipulation, began digging through the accounts Alexander's team was presenting to the court. What she found confirmed everything Marcus had flagged and more. Shell companies, offshore transfers, assets retitled in the names of family members. A systematic, sophisticated attempt to make a $400 million empire look on paper like it was worth a fraction of that. He's been planning this for at least 18 months. Patricia told me, sitting across from me in her office with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a stack of financial documents in front of her, thick enough to stop a door. "This isn't impulsive. This is methodical. Can we prove it? We're already proving it." She tapped the stack with 2 fingers. "Every transaction leaves a trace. He's good, but his attorneys got lazy. They thought you'd roll over. They were wrong." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "They were very wrong." But then came the moment that changed everything. The moment I wasn't prepared for. The moment that made my stomach drop to the floor. Alexander's attorney, a man named Richard Colton, who had the kind of practiced confidence that comes from winning too many times, filed a motion that included, buried in 6 pages of legalese, a challenge to the paternity of our children. I read it at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. I read it twice, and then I just sat there with my hands flat on the table and my heart doing something I can only describe as breaking and hardening at the exact same time. He was claiming James and Claire weren't his. He was going to use that to walk away from any parental financial responsibility. If he could create doubt, if he could make it seem like I had been unfaithful, like our children weren't his, then he could rewrite the entire narrative. He wouldn't just be the husband who cheated. He would be the victim, the wronged man, the billionaire whose wife had betrayed him and whose children might not even be his own. It was a lie a vicious, calculated lie. And I knew with every cell in my body that it was designed not because he believed it, but because it was a weapon. I called Patricia at 11:15 that night. She picked up on the second ring. "Did you see the filing?" I asked. "I saw it. He's lying. I know he's lying. He's doing this to destroy me in that courtroom. He wants the judge to see me as the unfaithful wife. He wants to flip the story." "Elena," her voice was steady, firm. "Listen to me. This is a desperate move. This is what people do when they know they're losing. He is scared." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "Now, I need you to get DNA tests done, voluntarily, before he can make a production out of demanding them. If we submit results ourselves, we control the narrative." I closed my eyes. "My children. Patricia, my children are going to have to—" "They'll be okay, a cheek swab, quick and painless. And when those results come back, because we both know what those results are going to say, we walk into that courtroom holding the truth in our hands, and there is nothing he can do." I took a long breath. "Okay. Elena, you're stronger than he thinks you are." "I know," I said quietly. "He always forgets that." The DNA tests were done within the week. Patricia submitted the request through proper channels, fully documented, fully transparent, no games, and we waited for the results while the court date loomed closer on the calendar. And then 7 days before we were supposed to stand in front of a judge, something happened that I had not anticipated. Something that even now I have a difficult time fully absorbing. Marcus Webb called me. "Elena," he said, and there was something in his voice, not alarm exactly, but weight, like he was carrying something heavy and was about to hand it to me. "I need to come see you, today if possible." I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. "What is it?" "I've been following the paper trail on the asset transfers, and I found something that goes beyond the financial hiding." I sat down. "Tell me." "Not on the phone. I need to show you the documents. Can you meet me at 2? I was at his office at 1:45. What Marcus laid on the table in front of me that afternoon was not just evidence of financial fraud. It was evidence of a conspiracy, a deliberate, coordinated effort between Alexander and 2 of his senior partners at the firm to falsify business valuations, deceive investors, and funnel money into private accounts under fictitious entities. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a criminal matter. I stared at the documents. I turned a page, then another. I could hear my own breathing. "Marcus," I said slowly, "does this mean what I think it means?" "It means," he said carefully, "that your husband may have more to worry about than a divorce settlement." I sat back in my chair, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something that I can only describe as the quiet, absolute certainty of a woman who knows down to her bones that she is holding the right cards. "How solid is this?" I asked. "Solid enough that I've already forwarded a copy to a colleague in the Financial Crimes Unit." He paused. "I wanted to tell you first. But Elena, this is bigger than I expected. And when it surfaces in that courtroom, it's going to change everything." I thought about Alexander walking into that building with Sophia on his arm. I thought about the smug look I knew would be on his face. I thought about the way he sat across from me at that kitchen table, so certain, so dismissive, so utterly convinced that I was nothing more than a problem to be managed. I thought about James and Claire and what it would mean for them to grow up knowing their mother stood up and told the truth. "Let it surface," I said. And 7 days later, I walked into that courtroom. I wore navy blue, understated, professional. My hair pulled back, no jewelry except my grandmother's small gold earrings that I always wear when I need to feel grounded. Patricia walked beside me, her briefcase heavy with everything we had built over these months, every document, every transaction, every lie traced back to its source. I sat down at the plaintiff's table. I folded my hands. I looked straight ahead. And then the doors opened. I heard them before I saw them, the sound of confident footsteps on marble, the low murmur that rippled through the room. And then Alexander walked in, and Sophia was right there beside him, and the look on his face was exactly what I knew it would be, that particular brand of arrogance that belongs to men who have never in their lives been made to pay for anything. He caught my eye across the room. He smiled. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I just looked right back at him and I thought, you have no idea what is in this room with us today. The judge took his seat. The room settled. And as Richard Colton began laying out Alexander's opening position, the carefully constructed narrative of the wronged husband, the unfaithful wife, the uncertain paternity, the modest assets, I sat very still and I let every word fall. Let him talk, I thought. Let him say every single word. Because when it is my turn, I am going to dismantle every syllable. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "You ready?" I looked at the sealed envelope in front of her. The DNA results. The truth official and irrefutable, and about to walk into the center of this room and destroy everything Alexander Brooks thought he had built against me. "More than ready," I whispered back. The judge shuffled his papers. He looked up. He looked at Alexander's table. Then he looked at mine. And then he said something that made the entire room go very, very quiet. "Before we proceed, Mr. Brooks, I believe there is a matter the court needs to address directly." I watched Alexander's face. The smile was still there, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. The judge's voice filled the courtroom like a verdict before the verdict had even begun. "Before we proceed with opening arguments," he said, setting down his papers and looking directly at Alexander's table, "the court has received documentation that requires immediate acknowledgement. Specifically, the results of a court-registered paternity evaluation submitted voluntarily by the petitioner." Alexander's lawyer, Richard Colton, straightened in his chair. "Your Honor, we were under the impression that the paternity matter would be addressed during the evidentiary phase, Mr. Colton." The judge's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I am not asking for your impression. I am informing the court of a procedural matter. The results are in, they are certified, and they are part of the record as of this morning." I kept my eyes forward. I didn't look at Alexander. Not yet. But I heard him. I heard the small sound he made, not quite a word, not quite a breath, something between the two. The sound a man makes when the floor shifts under him, and he hasn't decided yet whether to pretend it didn't. Patricia placed her hand lightly on the table beside mine. Not touching. Just there. Steady. The judge opened the envelope that his clerk handed him. He reviewed the single page inside with the expression of a man who had seen everything and was still capable of being unimpressed by people's choices. Then he set it down. The DNA results confirm, with a probability exceeding 99.97%, that Alexander Brooks is the biological father of both minor children, James Brooks, age 9, and Claire Brooks, age 7. He looked up. "The paternity challenge filed by the respondent is hereby dismissed." The silence in that courtroom was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And then I heard Sophia shift in the gallery behind us, the small creak of a chair, the sound of someone who had been very still suddenly becoming very aware of where they were sitting. Richard Colton cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the respondent's position was simply that, Mr. Colton." The judge looked at him again. Same tone, same quiet authority. "The matter is dismissed. Shall we move on, or would you like to spend more of the court's time on a challenge that no longer exists?" A pause. "We'll move on, Your Honor." I exhaled so slowly that no one in that room could have heard it. But inside my chest, something enormous released something I had been holding tightly for weeks, since the night I read that filing at my kitchen table and understood exactly what Alexander was trying to do to me, to our children, to the truth. He had wanted to make me the villain. He had wanted to stand in this room and point at me and say she was unfaithful. These children might not be mine. I am the one who was wronged. He had wanted to flip the entire story on its axis, and it had taken the judge approximately 4 minutes to dismantle it. Patricia leaned close and said very quietly, "First blood." I almost smiled. But we weren't close to finished. Not even close. Richard Colton regrouped faster than I expected, I'll give him that. He was a man who had been embarrassed in courtrooms before and had learned how to recover without showing the wound. He pivoted cleanly back to the financial presentation, pulling out charts and documents, and the carefully curated picture of Alexander's empire that his team had spent months constructing a picture designed to make a $400 million fortune look like a modest, struggling enterprise barely worth dividing. He talked about market downturns, about debt restructuring, about operating losses in 3 subsidiaries over the past fiscal year. His voice was smooth and practiced, and if you didn't know what I knew, if you hadn't seen what Marcus had put on the table in front of me 7 days ago, you might have almost believed him. I watched the judge's face as Colton spoke, neutral, composed, giving nothing away. A good judge always looks like that during opening arguments. They're listening for what's not being said as much as what is. Then it was Patricia's turn. She stood up slowly. She buttoned her jacket. She picked up a single sheet of paper, just one, and she walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor," she said, "my client Elena Brooks has been married to the respondent for 11 years. In that time, she sacrificed a career in law to raise 2 children, manage a household, and support a man whose business success she contributed to in ways that are difficult to quantify, but not impossible, grew from approximately $12 million in net worth at the time of their marriage to what independent valuations place at well over $400 million today." She let that number sit in the air for a moment. The respondent's team has presented this court with financial documents suggesting that number is a fiction, that the real value of Mr. Brooks's holdings is a fraction of that figure, that losses and debt and restructuring have somehow eroded a thriving empire into something barely worth the paper it's printed on. She paused. What those documents do not show, and what we intend to show, is where the money actually went. I heard Colton shift. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular for an opening. It's a summary of evidence," Patricia said calmly, not even turning to look at him. "Which is precisely what openings are for." She looked at the judge. "We will demonstrate through certified financial forensics and documented transaction records that the respondent has engaged in a systematic and deliberate concealment of marital assets, including transfers to offshore accounts, retitling of properties to shell entities, and a coordinated devaluation strategy designed specifically to minimize what this court would order him to share with the woman who stood beside him for 11 years and raised his children." She set the paper down. "We are prepared to prove every word." The silence this time was different, denser, more charged, and then I heard Alexander's voice for the first time that morning, low, controlled, but just barely. He leaned toward Colton and said something I couldn't make out, and Colton put a hand on his arm and shook his head slightly the way lawyers do when they're telling their clients to be quiet and trust the process. Alexander didn't look like a man who trusted any process that wasn't his own. Patricia sat back down. She didn't look at me. She was already reading her next set of notes. "That was good," I whispered. "That was the opening act," she whispered back. The morning moved in waves after that. Colton called his first witness, a financial analyst from a consulting firm that Alexander's company had retained a man who spoke in the dense, slightly soporific language of corporate accounting, describing asset valuations and liability assessments in tones that were clearly designed to make the judge's eyes glaze over. Patricia cross-examined him for 22 minutes. I watched her take that man apart with the focused precision of someone who had done her homework so thoroughly that she knew his report better than he did. She found 3 inconsistencies in his valuations alone, places where the numbers in his summary didn't match the underlying data he had been given, and she walked the judge through each one slowly and clearly, and by the time she sat down, the witness looked like he wished he had scheduled a dental appointment instead of a court appearance. The second witness was one of Alexander's business partners, a man named Gerald Whitfield, polished and confident, who spoke about the company's recent challenges with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed extensively. He used phrases like market correction and strategic restructuring, the way people use umbrellas in a downpour trying to stay dry under something that was fundamentally wet. Patricia had 3 questions for him. The first two were about routine financial matters, clarifications, dates, nothing that seemed alarming on the surface. The third question was this: Mr. Whitfield, are you familiar with a holding entity called Meridian Capital Partners, LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands in January of last year? The witness paused. It was not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds, but in a courtroom, 2 seconds of silence is a canyon. I'm aware of various holding structures that... Mr. Whitfield, yes or no, are you familiar with Meridian Capital Partners, LLC? I would need to review. We have the registration documents here which list you as a co-signatory. Patricia held up a document. Would you like a moment to review them? Colton was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning goes directly to the matter of asset concealment, Patricia said. I'll establish the relevance within 2 questions, Your Honor. The judge looked at Colton, then at Patricia. I'll allow it, but move it along, counselor. Mr. Whitfield, Patricia said, her voice calm as still water, did you co-sign the registration of Meridian Capital Partners, LLC, as part of an arrangement with Alexander Brooks to hold and obscure assets that would otherwise be subject to this divorce proceeding? The witness's face had changed. The polish was still there, but underneath it something had gone tight and unhappy. On advice of counsel, I invoke my right. Thank you, Patricia said. No further questions. She sat down. I heard a sound from somewhere in the gallery, not loud, just the murmur of several people processing the same thing at the same moment. I turned my head just slightly and glanced at Alexander. He was looking at his hands folded on the table in front of him. The smile was gone. His jaw was set. He looked like a man doing very rapid internal calculations about how many of his carefully constructed walls were still standing. Then his eyes came up, and they found mine across the room. And for the very first time in the 11 years I had known Alexander Brooks, I saw something in his face that I had never seen there before. Fear. Not the dramatic cinematic kind, not wide eyes and trembling hands, just that quiet, deep-set recognition that arrives when someone realizes the game has changed and they didn't see it coming. It was there in the slight flare of his nostrils, the fractional tightening around his eyes, the way his hands, though still folded, had gone white at the knuckles. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then I looked back at the judge. Behind me, I could feel the energy in the room. That particular electricity that builds in a space when people collectively understand that what they are witnessing has stopped being a routine legal proceeding and started being something else entirely. The lunch recess came at 12:30. Patricia and I stepped into the hallway with her associate, a young man named Theo, who carried the briefcases and had a photographic memory for case files, and we found a quiet corner, and I drank a cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard, and Patricia told me what was coming in the afternoon session. The forensic accountant, she said, this is where we lay the full picture. Every transfer, every shell entity, every retitling. The judge is going to see the complete architecture of what Alexander built to hide from this court. Will it be enough? I asked. She looked at me. Elena, what we have is not a hint or a suggestion. It is a documented, traceable, forensically verified map of exactly how he moved that money. Yes, it will be enough. I nodded. I looked down at my coffee cup. And the other thing? I asked. She understood what I meant. The thing Marcus had found. The thing that was bigger than the divorce. The thing that had been quietly forwarded to the Financial Crimes Unit before we ever walked into this building. That moves on its own timeline, she said. We don't control that, but it's moving. I thought about what that meant for Alexander, for the company, for everyone whose name was attached to those fraudulent valuations and offshore transfers. I thought about how a man could spend years constructing a fortress around himself. Money, power, influence, the sheer social weight of being the kind of person people were afraid to challenge, and how the whole thing could begin to come apart, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a single forensic accountant standing in a courtroom with a stack of documents and a quiet voice. He really thought I wouldn't find it, I said, not bitterly, just with the small, exhausted wonder of someone who has finally arrived on the other side of a very long road. He looked at me every single day for 11 years, and he genuinely thought that I wasn't paying attention. Patricia picked up her briefcase. People like Alexander always make the same mistake. What's that? They confuse loyalty with blindness. She looked at me. You were loyal. You were not blind. And that difference is exactly why we're here. The afternoon session opened with the forensic accountant, a woman named Dr. Sandra Yee, who had the calm, unhurried authority of someone who had testified in federal courts and emerged unscathed every single time. She took the stand with a thick, bound report and a manner that said, "I have found the facts, and the facts do not care about your attorney's objections," she began. Over the course of 90 minutes, Dr. Yee walked the court through 18 months of financial transactions. She explained clearly and methodically how 11 separate holding entities, most of them registered offshore, several of them using the names of family members and business associates, as nominal owners had been used to receive transfers from Alexander's operating companies. She showed how properties had been retitled days after the divorce filing. She identified 3 instances where asset valuations submitted to the court were materially inconsistent with valuations those same assets had received for insurance and lending purposes just months earlier. Every time Colton objected, the judge either overruled him or allowed the testimony to continue with minimal interruption. Every time I glanced at Alexander, he was slightly more still than the moment before. The stillness of a man conserving something energy composure, the carefully managed image of control because he could feel it being spent. And then Dr. Yee said something that I was not expecting, something that Patricia had not previewed for me. Additionally, Dr. Yee said, turning a page in her report, in reviewing the transaction records for the period beginning approximately 22 months ago, I identified a series of payments, regular, consistent, and coded under a vendor account labeled Strategic Communications Consulting, totaling approximately $340,000 over the period in question. The judge looked up. Go on? When I traced the vendor account, I found that the receiving entity was a sole proprietorship registered in the state of Nevada. The registered owner of that sole proprietorship, she paused to turn one more page, is Sophia Crane. The courtroom erupted, not loudly, not dramatically, in the way that rooms full of restrained adults erupt a collective sharp intake of breath, a sudden increase in murmured conversation, the rustle of people turning to look at one another, and then at the gallery where Sophia Crane was sitting very, very still. Colton was already objecting. Something about relevance, something about the characterization. The judge raised one hand and the room quieted. He looked at Dr. Yee. Are you testifying that marital funds were used to compensate the respondent's companion through a falsified business account? I am testifying, Dr. Yee said carefully, that documented marital funds were transferred to an account owned by Sophia Crane under the guise of consulting services for which I have found no corresponding business deliverables. Another sound from the gallery. I looked at my hands. I was remarkably calm. I had not known about this specific piece. Patricia had kept it close clearly, but I wasn't surprised. And I wasn't angry exactly, not in that hot and desperate way I might have been months ago at the beginning of this. What I felt was something stranger and more complicated. Something like sorrow that this was who he had been paired with, something like relief that it was now on the record, paired with something like the deep exhaled release of a truth that has been carried too long finally being set down. I turned and looked at Alexander directly. He was looking at Sophia, not with love, not with protectiveness, not with any of the things you might expect from a man looking at the woman he had chosen over his family. He was looking at her with something that looked a great deal like blame, and she was looking straight ahead at nothing with the expression of someone who has just understood exactly how alone she is in this room. I turned back to the front. I thought about the day my friend called me from that parking lot. The day I sat in my car and breathed and made the choice not to shatter. The 4 months of evidence, the sealed envelope, the forensic accountant. all of it building toward this moment, that Alexander, in his absolute certainty that I was nothing more than a wife to be managed and discarded, had never once imagined. The judge called a 15-minute recess. Patricia turned to me immediately. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were bright. "Elena," she said, "he's going to want to negotiate." I blinked. "Already?" "Colton will approach me before the end of today. I guarantee it." She leaned forward slightly. "The question I need you to think about, the question that only you can answer, is whether you want to let him." I sat with that for a moment. Whether I wanted to negotiate. Whether I wanted to end this today quickly, efficiently, with a settlement that gave me and my children what we needed and put all of this behind us. Or whether I wanted to continue. Whether I wanted every single thing in that report read into the official record. Whether I wanted the full picture in front of the judge and the public and anyone who had ever looked at Alexander Brooks and seen only the expensive suit and the confident smile. "What would you do?" I asked her. Patricia thought about it, genuinely considered it, which was one of the things I loved about her. "I would negotiate," she said, "because your children are 9 and 7, and the faster this resolves, the faster they stop living inside it." She paused. "But I would negotiate from a position of total strength, not 1 inch of movement that isn't on your terms." I nodded slowly. "And the other matter?" I asked. "The criminal matter, the financial crimes referral." "That," she said, "is entirely outside this table. That moves regardless of what we settle today. Alexander's attorneys know it, which is exactly why if Colton approaches me, he is going to be very, very eager to give you what you want." I looked across the room at Alexander, who was in a tight, low conversation with Colton and 2 other members of his legal team. His posture had changed, the shoulders that had entered this room set back, and certain were now angled inward slightly, almost imperceptibly, the way a structure changes when the foundation beneath it shifts. I thought about James. I thought about Claire. I thought about the life I was going to rebuild on the other side of this day, and the kind of mother I wanted to be in it, not someone still fighting, not someone still standing in the rubble, but someone who had walked through and come out holding everything that actually mattered. "Okay," I said. "If he comes, let him come." And even as I said it, I saw Colton excuse himself from Alexander's side and begin walking slowly, almost casually, in our direction. I straightened in my chair. I folded my hands on the table. I looked forward. He was 4 steps away. 3, 2. He says, "Mercer," Colton said, "might we have a brief word?" Patricia didn't turn immediately. She finished writing 1 sentence in her legal pad, capped her pen, and then looked up at him with the polite, entirely unimpressed expression she had probably been perfecting since law school. "Of course, Mr. Colton," she said. "What did you have in mind?" Colton didn't sit down. That told me everything. When a lawyer sits down, he's settling in for a real conversation. When he stays standing, he's testing the water before committing to the temperature. He stood just slightly to the side of Patricia's hands, loose at his sides, his expression arranged into something meant to look casual. It wasn't. "We'd like to explore the possibility of a settlement conference," he said, "informally, before we resume." Patricia tilted her head exactly 1 degree. "What kind of numbers are we talking about, Mr. Colton?" He glanced toward me briefly, then back to her. "That would depend on what your client is looking for." "My client is looking for her fair share of a $400 million marital estate," Patricia said, "plus full legal and physical custody of both children, plus documented child support, calculated against the actual valuation of her husband's holdings, not the creative fiction your financial team presented this morning." She paused. "That's what we're looking for." Colton's jaw moved slightly. "Mr. Brooks is prepared to discuss a figure in the range of—" "Before you give me a number," Patricia interrupted, and her voice was still polite, still level, still entirely without heat. "I want you to understand something. We are not in a position of needing to settle today. We have a forensic accountant on the stand who has not yet finished her testimony. We have additional documentation that has not yet been entered into the record. And—" She glanced down at her legal pad as if consulting a note, though I was fairly certain she didn't need to. We are aware that certain materials related to the Meridian entity and at least 2 other offshore structures have already been reviewed by parties outside this courthouse. She looked up at him. So when you give me a number, Mr. Colton, I would encourage you to make it a serious one, because the alternative is that we go back in there, finish what we started, and your client's situation becomes considerably more complicated than it already is. The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds. Then Colton said, "Give me 20 minutes." He walked back to Alexander. I had been watching their exchange from my seat without turning my head, which meant I was watching it through my peripheral vision and through the reflection in the glass partition along the side wall. I saw Colton reach Alexander. I saw him speak. I saw Alexander's head drop just slightly before it came back up. I saw his mouth form a word I couldn't read, but the shape of it was sharp. An argument. Patricia returned to her seat beside me. "He'll be back," she said. "I know." She looked at me. "How are you doing?" It was such a simple question. "How are you doing?" And I almost laughed because the honest answer was something I didn't have the language for yet. I was terrified and exhausted, and completely, absolutely clear. I was sad in a way that had nothing to do with weakness, sad for the life I had thought I was living, sad for what my children were going to have to understand too soon. Sad for the woman I'd been at 26, who looked at Alexander Brooks and believed every word he said. But I wasn't broken, and I wasn't going back. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm actually okay." She nodded like she believed me. "Good, stay there." 14 minutes later, Colton came back. This time he did sit down. He pulled a chair to the edge of our table and sat in it and set a single yellow legal pad in front of him with a number written on it in pen, and he turned it so Patricia could read it. She looked at it. She showed no reaction at all. She turned the pad to face me. I looked at the number. It was substantial. It was real. It was nowhere near enough. I looked at Patricia. She gave me the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet." "That's a starting point," she said to Colton, sliding the pad back. "Not a finish line. Ms. Mercer, that number represents what Mr. Brooks hoped we might accept before we heard the rest of Dr. Yee's testimony," Patricia said. "We're not there." She picked up her pen and wrote something on her own pad and turned it toward him. Colton looked at her number. Something moved across his face, not quite a wince, but adjacent to one. "That is not," he started. "Reasonable," Patricia said. "Mr. Colton, your client hid money in 11 offshore entities, paid his girlfriend $340,000 out of marital funds, and filed a paternity challenge against 2 children who share his DNA. What is or isn't reasonable is a conversation we passed about 3 hours ago." Colton sat back. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. He was a man doing the math and not liking the sum. "I need to make another call," he said. "Of course," Patricia said pleasantly. He left again. And that was when the recess ended, and the judge returned to the bench, and we all had to take our seats, and the negotiation, if that's what you could call the wordless, number-scribbled conversation happening in margins of a legal pad, paused. Dr. Yee retook the stand. For the next 40 minutes she continued. More entities, more transfers, 2 additional properties that had been quietly retitled after the divorce was filed, but before the court's asset freeze order had gone into effect, which Patricia immediately flagged for the judge as a potential violation of the preliminary injunction, and the judge noted it with an expression that suggested this was going to have consequences. I watched Alexander during all of this. I couldn't help it. I had spent 11 years reading this man, his moods, his silences, the precise degree of tension in his shoulders that told you whether he was confident or cornered, and old habits don't dissolve just because a marriage does. He sat very still now, which was its own kind of language. Alexander, in his natural state, was a man in motion, gesturing, leaning forward, commanding the space around him. This stillness was not calm. This stillness was the absence of options. Then Patricia called her second witness, and everything accelerated. His name was Daniel Park. He was 34 years old, had an MBA from Wharton, and had worked as a financial analyst at Alexander's firm for 3 years before quietly resigning 8 months ago. He was slight and precise in his speech, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to set it down. Colton objected to his appearance before he had spoken a single substantive word. The objection was overruled. "Mr. Park, Patricia said, "in your role at Brooks Capital Management, were you ever asked to prepare documents that you believed to be inaccurate representations of the company's financial position?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Who asked you to prepare those documents?" "My direct supervisor initially, but the instructions originated from Mr. Brooks." "Can you describe the nature of those inaccuracies?" "I was asked to produce valuation summaries for several subsidiary entities that understated their market value. The numbers I was given to work with did not match the internal performance data I had access to. The discrepancy was significant in some cases. The submitted valuations were less than 40% of what our own internal models showed." The judge was writing. "Did you raise concerns about these discrepancies?" "I did, twice in writing to my supervisor." "What happened?" "The first time I was told the figures had been reviewed and approved at the executive level. The second time I was called into a meeting with Mr. Brooks directly." "What happened in that meeting?" Daniel Park looked at his hands for a moment, then up. "He told me that I was an analyst, not an auditor. He told me that if I had a future at the firm, I would trust that the executives understood the full picture better than I did." A pause. "And then he told me that people who raised questions about things they didn't fully understand had a tendency to find themselves in difficult professional situations." The room went very quiet. "Was that a threat in your understanding?" "I understood it as one." "And then you resigned?" 8 months ago, yes." Patricia nodded. "One more question, Mr. Park. The documents you were asked to produce, the undervalued summaries, are any of them among the exhibits entered into the record in this proceeding today?" He glanced at the documents on the evidence table. "Several of them, yes." "Thank you. No further questions." Colton's cross-examination was aggressive and energetic and ultimately unsuccessful. He challenged Park's memory, his motives, his professional record. Park answered every question with the same quiet, factual steadiness, the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed not his answers but his honesty, who had decided simply to tell the truth and let the truth do what it did. By the time Colton sat down, he looked like a man who had been trying to put out a fire with his bare hands. I thought about what it had taken for Daniel Park to walk into this courtroom, the professional risk, the personal courage. I made a note to myself, not on paper, but in the place where I keep the things that actually matter, to find a way to thank him properly someday when all of this was over. The judge called another short recess, and this time Colton didn't wait 20 minutes. He came directly to Patricia, and this time he leaned down and said something low and close, and Patricia said something back, and he said something else, and Patricia looked at me and said, "He wants to step outside, all of us." We moved into the hallway. Me, Patricia, Theo, Colton, and a second attorney from Alexander's team, whom I didn't recognize. Alexander himself did not come, which was interesting, which told me he had decided to let his lawyers do the work of surrender while he sat inside and managed his expression. Colton looked different in the hallway than he had in the courtroom, less polished, more human. The armor that courtrooms give you, the ritual, the formality, the rules that protect everyone from the full impact of what's actually happening, none of that was available out here. We were just people in a hallway. "My client," he said, "is prepared to agree to full physical and legal custody in favor of Ms. Brooks with structured visitation rights for the respondent." I felt Patricia's stillness beside me. She was letting him finish. "He is also prepared to agree to a lump sum settlement of," he stated a number higher than the one on the legal pad, still short of what Patricia had written, "plus the primary residence and one of the investment properties, college trust funds for both children fully funded, irrevocable." Patricia said nothing for a moment. She was looking at him with an expression I had come to recognize, the expression she wore when she was deciding how much of what she knew to show. "Richard?" she said, dropping the formality of his surname for the first time all day. "You and I both know that what Dr. Yee walked through this morning is not the complete picture. You know what's in the rest of that report. Your client knows." She paused. And we both know that the financial crimes referral that's currently sitting on someone's desk in a federal building is not going away because he settles his divorce. Colton looked at the floor for half a second. Just half a second. So here is what I am going to take back to my client, Patricia continued. Full custody is offered. The primary residence, the lake house, and the 2 investment properties in her name. The lump sum settlement at the full number I gave you. College trusts irrevocable. Monthly support calculated at the real valuation of his holdings, not the fiction from this morning. And a full court-documented acknowledgement that both children are his biological children and his legal and financial responsibility in perpetuity. She let that land. He agrees to all of it today in writing, and we close this before the afternoon is over. He refuses we go back in there and finish, and everything that happened this morning gets read into the public record in full. Colton looked at his colleague. His colleague looked at the floor. "Give us 10 minutes," Colton said. He walked to the far end of the hallway. He pulled out his phone. He made a call. I stood with Patricia and Theo, and I stared at the middle distance, and I breathed. Theo, who was young and earnest and had barely spoken all day, looked at me and said very quietly, "Are you all right, Mrs. Brooks?" "Miss Navarro," I said, automatically, my maiden name, which I had quietly begun reclaiming in my own mind months ago, even before today. "And yes, I'm all right." He nodded. "You've been incredible today. I wanted to say that." I looked at him. He meant it. He was 27 years old, and he had watched this entire day unfold from 3 feet away, and he meant every word. "Thank you, Theo," I said. At the other end of the hallway, Colton lowered his phone. He walked back to us. He looked at Patricia. He looked at me. "He'll take it," he said. And there it was. 2 words. 5 letters total. The complete collapse of everything Alexander Brooks had built to protect himself from the consequences of what he had done. The months of financial maneuvering and legal strategy, and the carefully constructed narrative of the wronged husband, all of it folded and surrendered in a hallway outside a courtroom by a man on a phone who had finally run out of walls to hide behind. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect you to feel triumphant in that moment, and what I actually felt was something far more complicated. I felt a grief that was very old and very quiet grief for the marriage I had hoped we were building and the man I had believed him to be. I felt relief so deep it was almost physical, a loosening of something I had been holding tight in my chest for longer than I could clearly remember. I felt something very fierce and very tender when I thought about James and Claire, about the life I was going to build for them now, on ground that was finally solid. And somewhere underneath all of it, I felt the thing I had first felt in my car in that parking lot, the day my friend called me, that quiet, absolute clarity, the knowledge that I had paid attention, that I had not been blind. "Tell him we'll need it in writing before the end of the day," Patricia said to Colton. He nodded. We went back inside. The settlement documentation took 2 hours to draft, review, and finalize. Patricia's eyes were on every word. Theo flagged 3 places where the language was vague in ways that could be exploited later, and Patricia made Colton's team revise them. Twice. Alexander was present for the signing, but he was not the man who had walked through those courtroom doors that morning. The suit was the same. The face was the same, technically. But the quality of him had changed the way a room changes after a storm has moved through it. Things were still standing, but nothing was in quite the same place it had been. He sat across the table from me for the first time that day, actually across from me, not across a courtroom, but a table the way ordinary people have to do things. And he looked at me with an expression I could not fully read. I had expected anger. I had steeled myself for a final performance of the arrogance I had watched crumble all day. Instead, what I saw was something stranger and quieter. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly, maybe for the first time, and the clarity was not comfortable. He opened his mouth, then he closed it. Then he picked up the pen. He signed. I watched his signature go onto the paper, the loops of it, the decisive final stroke. Something about watching that signature appear was more real to me than anything else that had happened all day. This was the moment, not the DNA results, not Colton's surrender in the hallway. This This pen, this paper, this irreversible mark. Then Patricia slid the document to me. I held the pen. I thought about the woman I had been when I signed our marriage certificate. 29 years old, hopeful, in love, signing her name next to his on a document that felt at the time like the beginning of everything. I thought about James asking me 3 weeks ago during a quiet Sunday morning when the house was still, and he was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal with the particular solemn focus of a 9-year-old. "Mom, are you going to be okay?" And I had sat down beside him, and I had told him the truth, which was, "Yes, baby, we're all going to be okay." I signed. Patricia took the document. She passed a copy to Colton. She handed a copy to the judge's clerk. It was done. Outside in the hallway, after the judge had noted the settlement on the record and adjourned after Colton and his team had gathered their papers and left with the deliberate efficiency of people eager to be elsewhere, I stood with Patricia while Theo loaded the briefcases onto a cart. "That's it," she said, not dramatically, just simply, the way you say true things. "That's it," I agreed. She put her hand on my arm briefly. "You did well today, Elena. You did better than well." I looked at the courtroom doors. They were closed now. Inside the room was already being reset for whatever came next. Another case, another story, another set of people bringing their broken things to be sorted in front of a stranger. I thought about Sophia. I had not seen her in the hallway, and I didn't look for her. She was not my concern. She had never really been my concern. She was a woman who had made choices, and whatever came next for her was hers to carry. I thought about Alexander and what the next weeks and months were going to look like for him as the financial crimes matter moved forward on its own timeline, as Patricia had said. I did not feel satisfaction about that. I felt something more like a kind of neutral acknowledgement that the world had a certain logic to it, and that the logic was playing out the way it was supposed to. I picked up my bag. I thought about James and Claire waiting at my sister's house. I thought about the drive over there and the moment I walked through that door and what I was going to say when they asked how it went. I was going to tell them the truth, that their mother had walked into a hard place and told the truth and stood her ground, that it had been frightening and exhausting and worth every single moment, that some days the right thing and the hard thing are exactly the same thing, and you do them anyway, and that is what courage looks like in real life. Not dramatic, not glamorous, just steady, just true, just refusing to let fear be the last word. I pushed through the door into the afternoon, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the air felt completely simply clean. The drive to my sister's house took 23 minutes. I know because I counted, not the miles, the minutes. Each one felt distinct and separate, like beads on a string, each one carrying a slightly different weight. The first few minutes were pure adrenaline still burning off my hands tight on the wheel, even though I had nowhere left to fight. By the 10-minute mark, the adrenaline was gone, and what replaced it was a fatigue so deep it felt structural, like something in my bones had been holding tension for months and had only just now received permission to let go. By the time I pulled into my sister's driveway, I was so tired I sat in the car for a full 2 minutes before I could make myself move. My sister Carol was at the door before I even reached the porch. She had been checking her phone all day, I knew, because she had sent me 11 texts between 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, each one a variation of, "Are you okay? And how is it going? And I'm thinking about you." I had answered 3 of them. She forgave me without being asked. She took one look at my face, and she said, "Come here." And I walked into her arms the way you walk into the only place that has ever felt completely safe, and she held me, and I pressed my face into her shoulder the way I used to when we were girls, and something had gone badly wrong at school, and I did not cry. I thought I would. I had been waiting for the tears all day, braced for them, actually the way you brace for a wave you know is coming. But they didn't come. What came instead was this enormous, voiceless release, like pressure equalizing, like a room that has been sealed for too long, finally being opened to fresh air. "It's done," I said into her shoulder. She tightened her arms around me. "I know. Patricia called me." I pulled back and looked at her. "She called you about 20 minutes ago. She said to tell you." Carol smiled and her eyes were wet, even if mine weren't. She said to tell you that you were the best client she has ever had, and Patricia Mercer does not say that." I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh. It came out of nowhere, sudden and real, and it was the best thing I had felt all day. "Where are the kids?" I asked. "Living room. They've been pretending to watch a movie for the last 3 hours, but really they've just been waiting." I walked through the door. James heard me first. 9 years old with Alexander's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and a heart so big it still caught me off guard sometimes. He came around the corner of the hallway at a speed that was technically a walk, but emotionally a run, and he stopped in front of me and looked at my face with those eyes reading me the way children read their parents fluently and without effort, and he said, "Mom, did we win?" I crouched down to his level. I put both hands on his face. "Baby," I said, "we won." He threw himself at me so hard I nearly lost my balance. And then Claire, 7 years old, small and fierce and perpetually in motion, came around the same corner at full sprint and crashed into both of us, and the three of us ended up on Carol's hallway floor in a pile, and that was when I finally cried. Not from sadness, from the complete, overwhelming, almost unbearable fullness of this, my children in my arms, their warm weight against me, the knowledge that I had done what I said I would do, and they were safe, and we were going to be okay. It took me a long time to get up off that floor. The next 3 weeks were a specific kind of chaos that I hadn't fully anticipated the logistical aftermath of a life being restructured. Papers to sign, accounts to transfer, the house to think about, which was a complicated thing because it was the house where my children had grown up, and also the house where everything had fallen apart, and for a while I wasn't sure which of those facts was going to win. The lake house was mine now too. The investment properties, resources I had never had to think about before because Alexander had handled all of it, which was one of the ways control masquerades as generosity in a marriage like ours. Patricia walked me through everything. She was patient in a way that surprised me. I had only ever seen her in combat mode, and the version of her that sat with me in her office, explaining asset transfers and trust structures, turned out to be just as formidable, only quieter. I called Marcus Webb to thank him. He was characteristically brief about it. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just found the paper trail." "The paper trail won the day," I said. "No," he said. "You won the day. Don't let anyone rewrite that." I thought about that for a long time afterward. I had just begun to feel something like a new routine settling in. Drop off the kids' work. Through the paperwork, pick up the kids, make dinner, breathe, when Patricia called me on a Thursday morning, her voice carrying a different quality than usual. Not alarmed, but charged. "Elena," she said, "are you sitting down?" My stomach tightened. What happened? The financial crimes investigation. It moved faster than either of us expected. A pause. "Alexander was formally notified this morning. The SEC is involved and the Federal Financial Crimes Division has opened a full inquiry. His attorneys have been contacted." I sat with that. I had known it was coming. Marcus had told me it was coming. But hearing it stated plainly in Patricia's measured voice made it suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. "How serious is it?" I asked. "Serious?" she said. "What, doctor?" "Ye documented in the divorce proceeding is apparently consistent with a pattern they've been building a picture of independently. The Meridian entity, the offshore transfers there, are investors involved, Elena. People who put money into funds that were misrepresented to them. This goes beyond us." "What does it mean for the settlement?" "The settlement stands. It's finalized and court documented. Whatever happens to Alexander from here, your agreement is protected." She paused. "But I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it anywhere else." I looked out the window. I thought about Alexander, the man with the expensive suit and the confident smile and the absolute certainty that he was always going to be fine because he had always been fine. The man who had looked at me across a kitchen table and told me he wanted a divorce in the tone of someone closing a business deal. The man who had planned and schemed and hidden and lied and had done all of it with such complete conviction in his own invincibility. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me first." "Of course," she said. And then with the warmth she usually kept carefully tucked away, "Go live your life, Elena. You've earned it." I meant to hang up and do exactly that. I meant to put the phone down and go pick up Claire from school and come home and make spaghetti and help James with his math homework and simply quietly, gratefully live the life I had reclaimed. But 2 hours later, my phone rang again, and this time the name on the screen stopped me cold. Alexander. I stared at it. The phone rang a second time, a third. Every rational instinct I had said, "Don't answer." The settlement was done. The lawyers handled everything now. There was nothing he could say to me that needed to be said outside of documented legal channels. I knew all of this. I knew it clearly. I answered. "Elena." His voice was different. I noticed it immediately. The quality I had spent 11 years calibrating to was off. Not broken, not desperate, just stripped of something. The practiced confidence, the slight edge that always told you he believed himself to be the smartest person in any conversation, it was gone. What was left underneath was just a man's voice, older than I remembered it. "Alexander," I said, "why are you calling me?" A silence. Not long. "I heard you got the notification about the investigation. My attorney informed me, yes." Another silence. I waited. "Elena." He stopped, then started again. I know this is not the time for this conversation, and I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything." He paused again. "But I need to tell you something, and I need to say it to you directly, not through lawyers." Every nerve in my body was alert. Not afraid, just acutely, precisely present. "Then say it," I said. "I'm sorry." The words landed in a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, for the lies, for Sophia, for the money, all of it, for the paternity claim." His voice tightened for a moment on that last part. That was wrong. That was the worst thing I did in that courtroom. And I have known it since the moment it was filed, and I did nothing to stop it, because I was too deep into protecting myself to care about what it did to you. A pause. "Or to James and Claire." I closed my eyes. I pressed my free hand flat against the counter in front of me. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head, the way you rehearse conversations you're not sure will ever actually happen. I had thought about what I would say if he ever apologized. I had imagined versions where I was cold, where I was gracious, where I said everything I had been swallowing for years, and finally let him feel the full weight of it. What I actually said was, "Why now, Alexander?" Because he exhaled. "Because this morning I sat in a room with my attorneys and a federal investigator, and for the first time in a very long time, I had to look at what I've actually done. Not spin it, not reframe it, just look at it." His voice was very quiet. "And I thought about you in that courtroom, the way you sat there. And I thought about the fact that you had every reason to hate me, and instead you just told the truth. You just kept telling the truth, and you were right, and I had nothing." I opened my eyes. "You had nothing," I said carefully, "because you built everything on things that weren't real." "I know. You had nothing because you decided I wasn't worth telling the truth to. For years. You decided I was manageable, that I would accept whatever version of reality you handed me." "I know," he said again, "and you were wrong." "Yes," he said, "I was wrong." The silence stretched between us, not hostile, not warm, just present. "Is this for you, Alexander?" I asked. "Is this call for you, or is it for me?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I knew he was actually thinking about the answer. "Honestly," he said, "I think it's for me. I think I needed to say it out loud to you specifically, because you are the person I owe it to most." A pause. "But I also want you to know whatever you feel about me, whatever James and Claire grow up thinking about me, I want them to know I called their mother and I apologized. Not because it changes anything, just because it's true." I thought about James asking me if we were going to win. I thought about Claire crashing into me in Carol's hallway. I thought about the life these two children were going to grow up inside, the story they were going to tell themselves about where they came from and what their family was and what they should expect from people who say they love them. "I'll tell them," I said, "when they're old enough to understand it. I'll tell them you called." Another long silence. "Thank you," he said. "Alexander." My voice was steady, completely steady. "I need you to understand something. This call doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the investigation or the settlement or the fact that my children are going to grow up without their father in the house. It doesn't undo what you did in that courtroom with that paternity claim." I paused. "But it does tell me that somewhere under everything you still have enough left of yourself to know what you did. And I hope genuinely, I hope that you do what you need to do to become someone your children can respect eventually." I could hear his breath. "Take care of yourself," I said. "Goodbye, Alexander." I hung up. I set the phone down on the counter. I stood very still for about 30 seconds. Then I went and got my keys to go pick up Claire from school. I didn't think about the call again for the rest of that day. I made spaghetti. I helped James with his math homework. Claire told me at dinner in the breathless, sequential, gloriously exhausting way that 7-year-olds tell stories about a disagreement she'd had at recess with her best friend Lily, and how they had resolved it by both agreeing that neither of them was right, and both of them were a little wrong, and they had moved on. She was very proud of this resolution. She felt it was mature. That, I told her seriously, is more wisdom than most adults ever figure out. She considered this. "I know," she said, and went back to her spaghetti. James looked at me across the table. He had that look he got sometimes, the old soul look, the one that had been making my heart ache since he was about 5 years old. And he said, "Mom, are you happy?" I looked at my children. I looked at the dinner table in my own kitchen, in my own house, which was mine, now cleanly and finally mine. I thought about the woman I had been 11 years ago, and the woman I had been 6 months ago, and the woman I was right now sitting here in the ordinary, extraordinary middle of a life that was mine to build. "Yes," I said, "I am actually genuinely happy." He nodded like this was the correct answer. "Good," he said. "Me too." 2 weeks after that dinner, my phone rang at 7 in the morning, and it was a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer it. I answered it. "Ms. Navarro," a woman's voice, professional, clipped in the specific way of people who make calls like this for a living. "My name is Angela Reese. I'm a senior editor at Harrington Publishing. I was given your name by a colleague who attended the Brooks divorce proceeding last month." I sat up in bed. "I'm sorry. How did you get this number?" "Through your attorney's office with your attorney's knowledge. She suggested I call." A brief pause. "Ms. Navarro, what I'm about to say may surprise you, but I would like you to hear me out." I said nothing, just listened. "We are developing a book series focused on women who have navigated extraordinary personal and legal circumstances and rebuilt their lives. Your story specifically, the financial forensics component, the asset concealment, the way the case was built and ultimately resolved, has been discussed in several legal and publishing circles as one of the most remarkable divorce proceedings of the past several years." She paused. "We would like to offer you the opportunity to tell your story, in your own words, on your own terms." I sat in my bed in the morning quiet of a house that was mine, and I thought about standing in the hallway outside that courtroom. I thought about Patricia saying, "Tell the truth and let the truth do what it does." I thought about the sealed envelope and the forensic accountant and Daniel Park, with his steady, honest voice, and the way Alexander's signature had looked on that settlement document. I thought about every woman who had ever sat in a parking lot and held a phone against her chest and had to decide in the space of a single breath whether she was going to fall apart or start building. "Tell me more," I said. Angela Reese told me more. For 45 minutes, she told me more, and I listened, and I asked questions, and by the end of the call, I had not agreed to anything yet, but I had said one thing clearly, which was this: if I do this, I do it honestly. All of it. The fear and the mistakes and the parts where I didn't know if I was going to make it, not just the parts where I won. That, Angela Reese said, is exactly the book we want to publish. I called Patricia afterward. She picked up on the first ring. "I see Angela found you," she said, and I could hear the smile in it. "You could have warned me," I said. "I could have, but I wanted you to hear her pitch without a filter." A pause. "What did you think?" I looked out the window. The morning was clear and quiet and entirely ordinary and entirely mine. "I think," I said slowly, "that the story isn't finished yet." "No," Patricia agreed. "It really isn't." And she was right, because 3 days later, I received a piece of information that made everything that had happened in that courtroom look like the opening chapter of something far larger, something I had not seen coming, even with all the preparation and all the evidence and all the steady, careful attention I had been paying for months. 3 days later, Marcus Webb called me again. And this time, his voice carried that same weight I had heard in it once before, the weight of a man about to hand you something heavy. "Elena," he said, "I need to see you. Today." I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck the same way it had the first time he'd said those words to me. "What is it?" I asked. "It's about Sophia," he said, "and it's something you need to know before it becomes public." I closed my eyes, opened them. "I'll be there at 2, I said. Marcus was already at his desk when I arrived. No small talk, no coffee offered. He had a folder on the table in front of him, and his hands were flat on top of it, and he was looking at me the way he had looked at me the first time, with that careful, measured steadiness of someone who has learned that the way you deliver information matters almost as much as the information itself. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He opened the folder. He turned it toward me. "6 weeks ago," he said, "as part of my continued monitoring of the offshore account activity which I had kept running because the criminal inquiry was still open, and sometimes those trails keep moving even after a settlement, I found a transaction that didn't fit the pattern of everything else. I looked at the document. Numbers, account codes, a transfer date. It's a payment," he continued, "significant, made from one of the Meridian sub-accounts to a private account registered in Sophia Crane's name. Not the consulting account Dr. Yee identified in court, a different one. Personal, registered 8 months before the divorce filing." I looked up. "How much?" $800,000. The number landed in my chest like something physical. "That's more than double what went through the consulting account," I said. "Yes." He paused. "But that's not what I called you about." I stared at him. "I started asking questions about that account," he said, "about when it was opened, what the source of initial funding was, whether there was a pattern of deposits before this transfer." He looked directly at me. "Elena, that account was opened 4 years ago, not 2 years ago when Alexander and Sophia reportedly began their involvement. 4 years ago." The room was very quiet. "That means," I started. "It means the relationship between Alexander and Sophia Crane began at least 4 years ago, which means it began before the financial restructuring of his company, before the offshore entities were set up." He let that sit. "It also means it began approximately 1 year after you stopped practicing law and stayed home with the children." Something moved through me that I didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't fresh pain. I had passed the point where new information about Alexander's betrayal could cut me in the original sharp way. It was something older and heavier, the particular grief of understanding that a wound you thought you knew the full shape of was actually larger than you had mapped. 4 years. For 4 years, while I was raising our children and running our household and believing, truly believing in the way you believe things, you've built your entire daily life around that, I was in a marriage I had been alone. "There's more," Marcus said. "Of course there was more." I nodded. "The account activity in the early period, the first 2 years, shows regular deposits. Small ones, nothing that would flag independently. But when you look at the pattern, they correlate exactly with a series of cash withdrawals from Alexander's personal operating account." He turned another page. Someone was funding Sophia's lifestyle very deliberately and very quietly from the very beginning. Apartment rent, a car lease, a private membership she has held for years. He was building a life for her, I said. My voice was flat. Not cold, just spent the way you sound when you've run completely out of shock. He was building a parallel life for her, Marcus said, while you were building his actual life for him. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, Marcus, why does this matter now? The settlement is done. The divorce is final. Whatever Alexander did 4 years ago or 2 years ago, it doesn't change what I have. He nodded slowly, like he had been waiting for that question and had his answer prepared. It matters, he said, because Sophia Crane filed a lawsuit 3 days ago. I went very still. Against Alexander, he said quickly. Not you. Against Alexander. She is claiming that he made explicit financial promises to her over the course of their 4-year relationship, promises that were never fulfilled. She has emails, text messages, written commitments he made to her about what she would receive if the divorce went through. He paused. She is also alleging that the $340,000 in consulting payments were not gifts or compensation, that they were part of a contractual understanding between them, and that Alexander owes her significantly more than she received. I pressed my fingers to my forehead. She's suing him, I said, for just over $2 million. The sound that came out of me was not quite a laugh. It was the involuntary exhale of someone who has just been confronted with the perfect, complete, almost theatrical irony of their own story. Alexander Brooks, who had sat across from me with his arm around this woman, and his smug smile and his confidence that he had engineered every possible outcome in his favor, was now being sued by the woman he had chosen over his family. The person he had tried to weaponize against me had become a weapon pointed directly at him. Does she have a case? I asked. Her attorney seems to think so. The written commitments he made are frankly, Elena, they are damaging. He made specific representations to her in writing. And given that the financial crimes inquiry is already active, her attorneys are likely counting on the fact that Alexander will want to settle quietly rather than have more financial documentation entered into any public record. Marcus closed the folder. It's going to be a mess. I looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. I want to be very clear about something, I said. This is not my mess. I am not involved in whatever Alexander and Sophia do to each other from here. Correct? You're not. And nothing in her lawsuit affects my settlement or my custody agreement. Correct. Nothing. Then why did you need to tell me in person? He was quiet for just a moment. Just a beat. Because, he said carefully, Sophia's attorney has indicated that she may call witnesses, people who can testify to the nature and timeline of the relationship, people who knew both of them during the 4 years in question. He looked at me. Your name was mentioned as a potential witness, as Alexander's wife during that period. And there it was, the reason for the weight in his voice, the reason for the folder and the quiet office and the sit-down. I was not free yet, not completely. I called Patricia from the parking lot. She answered immediately. I had the specific sense that she had been waiting for my call, that Marcus had perhaps reached her before me and given her the shape of what was coming. I know, she said before I finished the sentence. Can they compel me? I asked. They can try to subpoena you, yes, but we can challenge it. Your direct knowledge of the relationship's timeline is limited. You didn't know about Sophia until your friend's call, and everything you know after that point was gathered through Marcus and the divorce proceeding, which is already on record. She paused. I want you to do nothing. I want you to make no contact with Sophia or her attorneys. I want you to let me handle this. Patricia, I am exhausted. I know. I want this to be over. I know that too. Her voice was gentler than usual. Not soft. Patricia was never soft, but human in a way she allowed herself to be occasionally when the situation earned it. Elena, listen to me. You are not the subject of this lawsuit. You are not the target of anything that is happening right now. You are a witness at most, and I intend to make sure it stays exactly that. A pause. What is happening to Alexander right now, the investigation, Sophia's lawsuit, All of it is the direct result of choices he made, not choices you made. You made good choices. You gathered the truth, and you told it, and you protected your children, and you settled your case. That story is finished, and it is finished on your terms. I leaned my head back against the car seat. Tell me it gets quieter from here, I said. A brief pause. It gets quieter from here. It did get quieter. Not immediately, and not without one more storm first, but it got quieter. The subpoena request came 6 weeks later. Patricia fought it on 3 separate legal grounds and won on 2 of them. The judge ruled that my testimony would be limited strictly to a single verified fact, the date I first learned of the relationship and nothing further. I answered one question in a deposition that lasted 11 minutes, and then I went home and made grilled cheese sandwiches for James and Claire, and helped Claire build a model of the solar system for her science class, and that was the entirety of my involvement in Alexander and Sophia's war. Alexander settled with Sophia. Patricia learned the terms through channels that were entirely legitimate court filings public record. He paid her. Not the full amount she had claimed, but enough that the lawsuit disappeared within 3 months of it being filed, and her attorney stopped making noise. What happened to Alexander afterward happened in stages the way complicated things do. The Federal Financial Crimes Inquiry, which had been described to me as moving on its own timeline, moved. His name appeared in a federal filing in November, not yet charged but named. By the following spring, 2 of his business partners, including Gerald Whitfield, who had invoked his right to silence on Patricia's cross-examination, had reached cooperation agreements with prosecutors. I followed these developments the way you follow news about a country you used to live in, with attention but from a distance, with the understanding that it was real and consequential, but no longer mine. One evening, about 8 months after the courtroom, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was brief. No greeting, no name. It said, "I want you to know that I told James I was sorry, directly. To him. He deserved to hear it." I read it twice. I set the phone down. I picked it up again, and I typed 3 words. "Thank you, Alexander." Then I put the phone in a drawer and went to find my son. James was in his room doing homework. He looked up when I opened the door, and he had that expression again, that steady old soul reading of me that had been making me feel simultaneously humbled and profoundly loved since he was small. "Did he call you?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah." "Are you okay?" He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it the way 9-year-olds do when you ask them real questions and actually wait for real answers. "I think so," he said. It was weird. He sounded different. He looked at his hands for a second. He said he was sorry he hurt you. He said it wasn't about me and Claire, and he needed me to know that. I sat on the edge of his bed. "What did you say?" I asked quietly. I said, "Okay." He looked up at me. "Is that bad? I didn't know what else to say." "No," I said. "That's not bad at all. You said exactly the right thing." He looked at me for a long moment. "Mom, did you love him when you married him?" The question hit me in a place I hadn't expected. Not because it was painful, it was, but cleanly the way old injuries ache in the cold rather than burn. Because of how direct it was, how much it trusted me to answer truthfully. "Yes," I said, "I did, very much." "What happened to it?" I took a breath. Sometimes people change, or sometimes you see someone more clearly over time and realize they were different from what you believed, and sometimes love isn't enough to survive that. I paused. But none of that changes the fact that your dad and I made you and your sister, and you two are the realest, truest, best thing that came out of that love. He considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Okay," he said again, and then, "Can I finish my homework?" I laughed. "Yes, you can finish your homework." Angela Reese and I met in person for the first time 2 months after her initial call. She was sharp and direct and funny in a dry, unexpected way, and we sat in a restaurant in the city for 3 hours and talked about the book and what it would be and what it wouldn't be. I told her what I had told her on the phone, all of it, or none of it. The fear and the uncertainty and the nights I sat in my car and wasn't sure I was strong enough, not just the victory. The victory means nothing without the fear, Angela said. Anyone can tell a story about winning. What people actually need to hear is how you kept going when you didn't know if you were going to win. Then that's what I'll write, I said. The book took 14 months. It was the hardest and most clarifying thing I had done since the divorce proceeding itself. Writing it forced me to revisit things I had preferred to leave at the edges of my memory, the exact shape of what those years of quiet erasure had felt like, the specific weight of believing that staying small was the safest way to love someone, the moment in my car in that parking lot when I understood that I had a choice and that the choice was mine and that no one could make it for me. I also, in the process of writing, made a decision about the law degree I had put in a drawer when James was born. I called my old mentor. She was in her 70s now, still practicing, still formidable. "I want to come back," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Elena, you never really left. You just took an extended detour." I started studying for the bar exam requalification in January. I passed in March. It was not easy. It required something of me that I hadn't had to demand of myself in years, a kind of sustained, rigorous focus that refused to soften just because it was hard. James proofread my practice essays. Claire made a banner that said, "Go Mom," in purple glitter glue, and taped it to the refrigerator the week of the exam. I passed. The morning the results came through, I sat at my kitchen table in my house on a morning that belonged entirely to me, and I read the words on the screen 3 times, and then I put my face in my hands, and I cried. Hard. The tears I had been waiting for since that first day in the courtroom, the ones that hadn't come when I needed them to, they came now. Not from sadness, from the enormous, staggering, almost impossible relief of a woman who had found herself again. Patricia called to congratulate me before I had even texted her. Someone in the exam board's administrative office had apparently mentioned the results to a colleague who knew her assistant who knew well. Patricia had her ways. "Welcome back, counselor," she said. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," she said. "You built the case. I just stood next to it." I joined a small family law practice in April. Not a big firm with glass walls and expense accounts, a practice with 4 attorneys and a waiting room full of people who needed someone to stand next to their truth and help them tell it out loud. People who sat across from me with shaking hands and lowered voices and stories that were still inside them waiting. On my first day, I sat down across from a woman who had come in for an initial consultation. She was in her late 40s. She had good posture and careful makeup, and the specific kind of stillness that belongs to people who have been holding themselves together through the force of will for a very long time. She looked at me and she said, "I don't know where to start." I folded my hands on the desk. I looked at her calmly. With everything I had learned in the previous 2 years, every morning of fear, and every night of building, and every choice to tell the truth when lying would have been easier behind my eyes. "Start anywhere," I said. "I'm not going anywhere, and whatever you tell me, I will believe you." Her eyes filled immediately, like someone had opened a valve, and I understood in that moment with total, clean, unshakable clarity that this was the reason. Not just the settlement, not just the house, not just the signed documents and the irrevocable trusts. This room, this woman, this table between us, this second life built deliberately and honestly on the wreckage of everything Alexander Brooks had tried to take from me. He had walked into that courtroom with a smile and a mistress and the absolute conviction that I was a woman who could be discarded. He had been wrong about everything, and I had become in the fire of that wrongness exactly who I was always supposed to be.